Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Professor Hamamoto, and it is July 12th, year 2022. It is 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. I am thrilled to be with you here today in this historic times. I mean, incredible events taking place within the last week or so. I don't even have to recount them, including on the extreme edge one of the co-founders of a satanic church in South Africa who converted to Christianity. And you also have some signs of a moral realignment with the U.S. Supreme Court deciding to abandon its previous decision on Roe versus Wade. But there's more to come. And today we're going to be devoting, of course, we can't forget the Georgia cromlechs or guide stones, the misguided stones, which I gave a talk on last week, which was very well received. I'm very thankful. And I appreciate you being here today. But today we are going to devote our attention to the assassination of one Abe Shinzō, who was the former prime minister of Japan. He had two terms. He skipped a couple years, and the official reason was for health reasons. But he came back. He made a comeback, and there was much to do about that. They view him as one of the more effective, influential prime ministers of the post-war period, which I hasten to add has largely been controlled by the United States of America through the kuromaki or kuromaku process, and that is the cloaked, the blackguard people in the kabuki who move the large, or bunraku rather, the puppets, the puppet masters, in other words. All right, but I'll get to that in a moment because it may very well be, as I'm suggesting in the very title of today's talk, it may very well be the order of death, the brotherhood of death, that could be the hand that holds the handmade weapon, right? The handmade weapon, so called, was not fabricated in Japan. It was fabricated in the United States, right? And I'm going to try to unpack what I'm implying by that statement. And I refer to this as cleverly as the killer bees, as in Biden, Pedo Joe Biden, right? We know that story's unfolding right now. We're going to be lucky if we have him around much longer to mock and just make fun of it, you know. So enjoy it while you can. It doesn't really get us anywhere, but you know we get our jollies from it. But there's Biden and there's Becerra, who many of you may not know of. If you're from California, you might have a familiarity with him. He comes from California by way of Stanford University. By the way, he's a homeboy. He's a Sacramento homeboy. Don't cry for me, Sacramento. And his name is Xavier Becerra. And I say Xavier is important because I think he's named after Francisco Xavier. And he was the priest sent over by the Society of Jesus to go and plant the flag of the Vatican in Japón, or as we know as Japan. That's a Xavier Becerra. So he might have the motive, according to his Vatican handlers, to be part of this assassination by a lone gunman carrying a handmade double-barreled shotgun in largely gun-free Japan. Right? There's lots being made about that, including by Pedo Joe Biden, the president, when he couldn't help it but put a dig in there. Oh yeah, it's the first gun death of this year in America. We've had 3,000 already. Well, Pedo Joe, maybe you should retire in Japan. When it's on, if you get to retire at all, I'm sure you saw your life flash before your eyes when you got the news from the CIA that your buddy Abe Shinzō is now in Valhalla, right? And the third person is Burns. That would be William J. Burns. He's the current director of the Central Intelligence Agency. And there's your killer bees, right? Okay, what do I mean by that? Okay, let's take a look at this. Let's see if these graphics line up for us. I'll comment. There's no audio on this. Like the. By the way, I don't know if you recognize the Gojira or Godzilla March by Ufukube Akira, the composer. That's right from the original the original and the best Godzilla. So here's some graphics I'd like to share with you. Here's the ill-fated poison chalice. You know the character on the right, Pedo Joe, and that's Abe Shinzō on the left. It's going to be less arcane. It's going to be quite relevant to what's going on in America. Be patient. I know that we're used to Mr. Miyagi and the last samurai being, some white guy, Tom Cruise, and the 47 Ronin is some other white guy named Keanu Reeves. So we're not really used to seeing Japanese faces and Japanese people playing Japanese roles, right? And we talk about secret societies and the New World Order. It's always about Europe, Western Europe. But never about East Asia or Asian, and maybe sometimes Philippines, which I brought in. And that's part of my contribution here. So keep that in mind as we're going through these little graphics. That's Abe Shinzō, who, by the way, is the grandson on the maternal side of a Class A, according to the U.S. Military Court of Justice, was classified as a Class A war criminal after World War II, right? He was sent to Sugamo prison, which later was converted to a 60-story building, was the highest in Asia till about, I think, the late 70s or so. But anyway, that was his grandfather. So he's part of this bloodline. And I raise that because one of the theories that are being advanced is that this is like a multi-generational familial grudge between these warring families and factions. There might be an element of that. I wouldn't discount that. There are many motives, just like in the John F. Kennedy assassination. There were many parties who would have liked to have seen him dead, and whether they cooperated or not, we're still trying to figure that out. But that's important to understand because Abe is being tagged with being a ultra right wing militarist, mostly by American and British academia and the press. The National Review said, this is the return of Tojo and Hirohito and all these other miscreants that we learned to hate in all them Hollywood movies, right? And again, you got to get over all that popular culture programming to understand what I'm saying here. That's part of the difficulty in going through this material here, is that the popular culture has already been conditioned with certain types of prefabricated understandings, or really pseudo understandings. So we think we know all about transhumanism because we saw Star Trek, or we're always talking about the Matrix, or we know all about posthumanism, right? Because we've seen all the science fiction movies. Same way with Japan. We think we know it. We don't. And I'm not going to tell you my bona fides. I've lived in Japan twice for extended times, a year each time. I would like to have been there longer, but I had to come back to work. But anyway, so I do have a good deal of professional and personal experience being in Japan, living in Japan, studying Japan. Although I'm not a Japan specialist, I have probably more than a working knowledge than most professionals in my field, right? So here we have Pedo Joe on the left, and you might not recognize the guy behind him, just hovering over there. I don't know, ready to catch him if he passes out or changes his diaper. I don't know. But that is Xavier Becerra, the former Attorney General of the state of California under, I guess it was Gavin Newsom, or maybe he came in under Jerry Brown Jr. I think he goes back to the Jerry Brown Jr. Administration in the state of California. And in that capacity, and I when I saw this, this was like, it was a news conference, I guess, shortly after the assassination was announced. I said, well, what is Becerra doing there? He is only the Secretary of Health and Human Services. He's not the Secretary of State. He's not, the head of the House of Representatives, the U.S. Senate. He's a cabinet member. But I'll I'll answer my own question as we move into this, why this shadow president, he might be the one who's really, people talk about Kamala Harris. It might be Becerra who's really pulling the strings and propping up El Cid, which is Joe Biden, right? El Cid has died a long time ago, but he's on his horse and he's, still fighting the Moorish invasion, but he's dead. He's long dead. So Becerra is the, his Pancho Sanja, if you want to look at it that way. And this is not hyper speculation on my part. He does have a Jesuit background. This is Javier Becerra, right? And as you know, and it's not to cast aspersions on Roman Catholics or the Pope of Rome or the Vatican or the Vatican assassins or the Knights of Malta or anybody else, take it for what it's worth. But Joe Biden is also a Roman Catholic. You know this, even though Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano denounced Pedo Joe by name in a recent, in English language, in a recent message that he sent via John B. Wells' show, right? Caravan to Midnight. Check that out if you can find it. You might have to go behind a paywall to see it or subscription. But anyway, I'm not the only one who's critical of Biden on that score. So let's take a look further into this. Oh, there he is. The shadow, el presidente, el jefe, Xavier Becerra. He's part of the new emerging Latino mafia that are being put in place by the Sabatini Francis banker establishment, right? Because they don't want to get the blame all the time, so they try to put some yellow faces up there. They put some black faces up there. Now that like with Obama, now they're trying to put some brown faces up there. And that's Xavier Becerra, and he's been preconditioned. Let's take a look at his background here. Oh, it's frozen up. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, let me show you. Let me put my face back up there. I guess I'm being frozen out here. Let me just kind of go through his bona fides there. I have him committed to memory. He's a Stanford University product. He's the son. I don't know if he has any siblings or not. Becerra here. Yeah, let's take a look at his scheming face there. But he comes out of Sacramento, and he went to, I think it was McClatchy High School. I was just by there the other day. It's right in my neighborhood. I think it's the oldest high school in Sacramento, and it's named after the McClatchy, founder of the newspaper chain, and they're notorious anti-chinitos. They had, and then later they were anti-Japonesa. They were never anti-Mexicano though, for some reason, because they used them as laborers, and plus they are also part of the Jesuit missionary system as part of the mestizo population. But McClatchy was also anti-Japonesa and anti-Chinito. So Becerra is perfectly cast for that purpose. So then he was, of course, the first person in his family, they make a big deal out of it, to attend college. And where did he go? He went to Al Stanford University in Palo Alto, right? And I don't really have to give you much of a backstory on Al Stanford University. And from there, it's kind of interesting because he caught my attention quite a while ago, not just because I live in California, but these characters have a backstory that most people, it just passes over them. And I'm putting it out right here in public. After he graduated from law school, Stanford, right? Just check his Wikipedia if you want to. He graduated from Stanford Law. And let me remove this deal from the studio. I think I might be taxing the memory here. And then he took a year off. I can't remember. I think it was during his schooling, but he went to the University of Salamanca in España. And I said, wow, that sounds familiar. University of Salamanca. Yeah, I know it's an old medieval university. Spain has quite a number of them, probably second in number only to Italy. And I said, yeah, Salamanca. Isn't that where uh, Ignacio Loyola? Isn't that where he got his training? Yes, that's the center of the Society of Jesus, and they're still very much today training members of the faith at the University of Salamanca. So when I imply or state or allude to the fact that Xavier Becerra might be a Vatican assassin or an asset, that's John Phelps, by the way. That's his term, Vatican assassin, and he wrote the book on an excellent one, by the way, that you can find is readily available. It's required reading whether you are a non-believer, Roman Catholic, Protestant, atheist, you believe in the New World Order or don't, you think it's a bunch of garbage, it's fun, it's entertaining for you. Vatican Assassins is a good book. But anyway, he has connections to University of Salamanca. He was there for only a year, didn't get a degree, advanced degree or anything. However, let me see if I can bring him back. And oh, I guess the powers that be don't want me to. I'll take him off there too. Um, the third person who I'm referring to as one of the killer bees is William J. Burns, who's the current director of the CIA. So I looked into his background. He comes from a military family. His father was a high ranking officer. I can't remember which branch. I think it was Army. It wasn't the Navy. I think it was either the Army or the Marines. But anyway, he has that background, but he went into the diplomatic corps. He's a professional diplomat for a change. Well, he's the CIA director, so I guess they're one and the same, because if you're CIA, you're usually attached to a diplomatic mission overseas, and you get the diplomatic uh, goodies, I guess, the immunity and many of the officers who are with the diplomatic corps have that dual fold, maybe even a trifold, if you include the military function. So he comes out of that background, but then also his, again, academic background. He attended Oxford University, and he got his grad. He is a PhD or a doctor, LLD or something, but he does have a doctorate. It's just like he has a doctorate in what is it, international relations? I can't really remember, but the point is that he was at Oxford for a number of years, so that tells me that there's that British intelligence, Anglo-American intelligence connection there that often intersects with these international events. So there we have the killer bees. You got Biden, you got Becerra, and you've got possibly Burns. He's head of the CIA, and as you know, as I've alluded to at the top of this talk, the CIA has been running Japan since the end of World War II. They have installed successive prime ministers, probably had something to do with Abe being in there once or twice. And the first post-war prime minister, as I mentioned, I believe it was his maternal grandfather. It might have been someone else a little bit before him, but Kishi, right, Nobusuke, who was his maternal grandfather, was one of the earlier post-war prime ministers inserted by. This is not me saying this. A number of years ago already, the New York Times, and they probably knew this years ago, but they finally released it for public consumption. Maybe they wanted to embarrass somebody in the State Department or in the CIA or in Japan, something like that, because none of these releases, these reveals are ever innocent. But it was revealed a number of years ago in the New York Times that the Central Intelligence Agency had been behind the Liberal Democratic Party continuously since the end of World War II. It's not even a secret anymore. It's part of the historical record. So already we have a very, very close relationship between post-war Japan leadership and the United States and its respective security and spy agencies. How close? Let's see here. Let's add to the stream here. Let's see if StreamYard allows me to run this short clip. Watch it closely, because I don't know if I'll be able to run it a second time. But it is President Joe Biden and the shadow, Sancho Panza, the shadow president, Xavier, and he's the Secretary of Health and Welfare. And by the way, I think I figured out why they put him up, Bercerra, why they put him there instead of the Secretary of State or someone who's in the foreign services, a high-ranking person there. Why? I think it's a kind of a visual taunt to the Japanese establishment and to the security people in the United States for a job well done. It's a signal we pulled it off, right? Because as you know, the Central Intelligence Age in the golden years under the Dulles regime, Allen Dulles, right, and a little bit after, they had something called the Health Alteration Committee, right? And Becerra is the head of health and human welfare. So I guess he's involved with health alteration as well. In this case, they took out Abe. They altered his health as well. So maybe it's a joke. Maybe I'm reading more into it. I don't know. But notice in this little blip here, am I hearing right? Please help me. Am I hearing right saying that hearing Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, notice I didn't call him Peter Joe this time, hopefully that they'll let me run the clip. uh, Tell me if I hear correctly that President Joe Biden said, yeah, I'm going to go over to the Japanese consulate. I'm going to sign the book of condolences on, and I'm going to head over to the CIA. Right? Wow, he's making, killing two birds with one stone, so to speak, right? With a double-barreled homemade shotgun. But yeah, he's going to go pay his respects, right, at the Japanese consulate in D.C., and then he's going to go to CIA. Maybe I'm mishearing, or maybe I'm hearing what I want here. You tell me. Here we go.
I tried to put a call in to the present Prime Minister, and he was very late there at night. I'll be talking there in the morning. I'm going to be stopping to sign the condolence book at the Japanese embassy on the way to the CIA.
There you go. Did I hear correctly? Tell me in the chat room here. Spooks used Japan to arrest Bobby Fischer. Yeah, Bobby Fischer knew what the New World Order was all about. Can't remember the exact title of their documentary, but I recommend the one on Bobby Fischer. He was also anti-Zionist as well. And of course, they said he's mentally ill. What do you expect? He's Bobby Fischer, the chess genius, probably the best. He beat Boris Spassky. He beat the Russian chess masters. Bobby Fischer. I mean, I don't know anything about chess, but I really have a lot of respect for Bobby Fischer. So did he say on the way to CIA? Well, okay, maybe you don't know. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Anyway, let's listen to that one more time.
The Prime Minister, and he was very late there. I tried to put a call in to the present Prime Minister, and he was very late there at night. I'll be talking there in the morning. I'm going to be stopping to sign the condolence book at the Japanese embassy on the way to the CIA.
Yeah, I think I heard it correctly. On the way to CIA. Okay, that leads me to the next excerpt here, and I hope YouTube allows me to play it. The gods of YouTube. I'm removing that one from that clip from the studio. It might be just a memory issue. And this is something that I have excerpted prior to this talk here when I talked about the infiltration or the attempted infiltration of the Society of Jesus into Japan in order to take it over. They succeeded in the Philippines on the part of King Felipe. That's why it's called the Philippines today. And it's a Freemasonic country because the Freemasons went head to head with the church, and they decided to divide it up. The Catholic Church gets the souls of the Filipinos, and the Freemasons get the real estate. They get the money. So between the two kingdoms, they divided amongst themselves, and that's why Philippines, even though it has more natural resources, far more than Japan could ever even dream about, is still a relatively poor country. Parts of it are fabulously wealthy, but a lot of it is, quote unquote, third world squalor, where you don't see any indication of third world squalor in Japan. So we're talking about CIA. Okay, so let's look at the David Dionisi clip here that talks about the Brotherhood of Death and their overarching worldview, right? Because I think the Brotherhood of Death was an operation here. The CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, their descendants, right, in the assassination of Abe Shinzō, not without help, right? Because you saw the clips as I did. How does this unemployed 41-year-old, uh, I think probably lived with his mother, he might have been what they call hikikomori, right? Vaccine damaged game player, Game Boy person who doesn't go anywhere, right? But he had been at a job before. There's a whole story, a legend behind. And supposedly and we'll get to this in a moment. Supposedly he was getting vengeance, payback for this organization. We know it as Unification Church. They changed their name. Who had built his mother out of her life savings. So Abe supposedly, and he does, I think, have connections with the Unification Church, Reverend Moon. I don't know if you remember him. The Moonies, remember that. And the Japanese right had a lot of close connections. In fact, they're a product of the Japanese right wing, as I'll get to in a moment. So that's the story we're getting about the assassin. But who's behind the assassin, right? And it's really not enough to say this is all theatrics or it's just a distraction. All that we need specificity here, right? This sort of premature knowingness is really know nothingness. It's just like you're playing. Yeah, I got that. I know it. Yeah, it's just the ad. Okay, come on, grow up. Try to learn something here. Here we go. Dave Dionisi. I'll put myself out here.
Members of a secret group, known as the Brotherhood of Death, created a plan to start three world wars. The first in 1914, a second in 1939, and a third.
Well, appropriately enough, it gets stuck on that. Some of you may recognize that it gets stuck on that mural. I think they might have taken it down, but that's at the Denver International Airport, and this is about the bio war that's supposedly going to be taking out culling much of humanity there. I forgot the name of the mural. It's kind of a reverse takeoff on the whole muralista movement in Mexico. But anyway, Dionisi goes on because it looks like I'm not going to be able to run that either. But Dionisi talks about how as we know them, the Order of Death, Skull and Bones, 322, have this free Masonic heritage that allows them to ride through any type of government regime, elected officials in this country or anywhere else in the world, irrespective of laws, constitution, moral precepts, you name it. They're above it all. They are law of gods unto themselves. This is the Brotherhood of Death. So Dionisi goes through that quite well. He does an admirable job. I'll take him off of the feed right now since we're not going to be able to see that. And for confirmation of this, and I might get to this book next Thursday or this coming Thursday, but the Order of Death or the Brotherhood of Death, the Central Intelligence Agency, their MO, their modus operandus, is detailed from a first person involvement of, and he might be close to 90 years old by now. He might even have passed on. He might be over 90. Lived to ripe old age. His name is Antonio Venciana. He's Cuban, I think, born originally in Spain at a young age. His parents immigrated to Cuba, and he was a Cuban patriot, but he was very much tied in with the older oligarchy, the sugar kings and manufacturers. He worked for the richest man in Cuba, by the way. I forgot his name, but he was the accountant. He had a degree in accounting. But anyway, when Castro came into power, he was recruited by the Brotherhood of Death in order to assassinate uh, Castro. That was one of his tasks. But the more important task, and this is one of the major takeaway points that I get from this book, his primary task was to put out disinformation to the public, to the Cuban public, to wreak havoc, uncertainty, demoralization is a very important part. That was his key function there as an educated insider within the economic system. So, by the way, just as an anecdote that you might be able to recognize, right? It was he or his group, Veciana, who put out this story because this is what CIA do. These are people who write fiction and they write poetry and they do jokes, write fun and games. Health Alteration Committee. Jesus or Jesus Angleton was an amateur poet. So they make up these scenarios. And one of the scenarios they made up was that Castro, right, this he'd come into power by this time, that Fidel Castro, El Líder Máximo, was going to abduct children, Cuban children, and take them in and have them live communally, take them way out of their family, right? And nothing is more sacred outside the church than the Cuban family, right? So that rumor was floated out there. So what it did was create a huge panic. I'll get back to Japan in a moment, but these characters run these scenarios all over the world, not just in Japan or in Cuba. So what happened is that they created a panic. A lot of Cuban parents, middle class parents who had the wherewithal, gave their children up to probably a humanitarian organization. I don't know the name offhand. There should be a book written about this. Maybe there is one or two. But there was an operation that's called Operation Pedro Pan, as in Peter Pan, right? You know the story Peter Pan, J.M. Barrie. He was a pedophile himself. He was friends with Daphne du Maurier. He was part of that British upper crust pedophilic public school milieu, right? So they created this Operation Pedro Pan, and again, it's a joke, right? These are CIA people, not Peter Pan, but Pedro Pan. And thousands of children were sent to America without their parents, and many of them never saw their parents ever again. And there's an end to this story. One of those children of Operation Pedro Pan was one Miguel Bezos, and he turned out spawning this bastard child that we know today as Jeff Bezos, head, the titular head, the pass through, the front man for the retailer that ate the world, Amazon.com. Anyway, so there are any number of takeaway points here, and the deal is that there is no nationality, according to his handle. His trainer, who's his trainer, turned out to be David Atlee Phillips. All right, you recognize the name if you read anything about the Kennedy assassination, the Bay of Pigs, which is called Playa Girón in Cuba. They don't call it the Bay of Pigs. All right. But if you know him, if you know the literature, the name David Atlee Phillips will immediately be recognizable. And he's the one who recruited Veciana, who kept his silence for years and years and years until just before he was ready to die, and he gave it up and revealed that, yeah, the CIA at the highest echelon were involved with the assassination of our own president. So if the CIA would be involved, and again, there is no literal smoking gun, but many people who have studied this, or even casual students of the Kennedy assassination, will agree that the CIA, by now, that the CIA had a hand in it. So if they're going to kill our own American president, and they ostensibly work for the American people on the behalf of the United States of America, would it be too far of a stretch of the imagination to think that they would be involved in an overseas assassination, ostensibly of our key ally in East Asia, Japan, right? Who they've been controlling anyway since the end of World War II. All right. So you see the case that I'm trying to build. Now, this is not a full-blown indictment of Bercerra or the current CIA or Joe Biden. These are just hypotheticals that I'm putting out here. This is what we do in order to come to a more accurate accounting of what's going on historically, right? And I'm the first person that I know of who's laying it out in this fashion, going mostly from memory now. Because as I said, I've been studying this for quite some time now. Let's look at the other relationship that the CIA has enjoyed with Japan, a very close one since the end of World War II. I alluded to it earlier at the beginning of this talk, and that was the close cooperation with former war criminals, right? Both military and civilian war criminals of Japan. Now, these were people who were overseas in China, Manchuria, or Manchukuo is Japan. It was a colony of Japan, or Singapore, or the Philippines, outside of Japan. And they probably had some designs on the Pacific island archipelago. I don't know, as far as Hawaii, maybe so, but definitely Guam and other Saipan and other hotly contested areas during the Pacific War. But the occupation government, SCAP, which was headed by General Douglas MacArthur, made quick a modus vivendi with these war criminals, many of them who were indicted and spent some time at this prison there. That is called Sun Towers. I think it's about 60 stories or so, once or 70, something like that. Well, once the tallest building in Asia before it was, eclipsed by some other tower. I don't know what it was, but that's built on the site of Sugamo Prison. And Sugamo Prison was the site where perceived traitors to the imperial throne, we're talking about imperial Japan now, pre-war Japan, that's where all the spies, the traitors, and accused intriguers were housed at Sugamo. And then after the war, that's where all the Class A war criminals, Japanese war criminals, that's where they were housed while they're being interrogated, debriefed, finding out about Unit 731, all the different assets, and they'd figure out who's going to be useful in the post-war American-led Japan, which continued up until recently. And one of the possibilities for Abe's assassination, this is coming from me, I haven't read anywhere else, but one of the reasons that I think Abe might have been assassinated is because he was exhibiting independence from the American-led post-war order that Japan always hewed to since 1946. Always. They would kind of hem and haw, and they might drag their feet a little bit, or slow roll some sort of trade disagreements. Maybe Japan was importing too many cars, putting Ford and Chevrolet into crisis, which was intentional, by the way, throughout the 80s. So, there were all these disagreements there. But Japan, over the last several years, with the rise of China, has been fundamentally rethinking its relationship to the United States, which was always its older brother. Right. In the hierarchy, the family hierarchy, the oldest brother, Chonan, inherits the property. He's got the highest respect and all that. And so they kind of figured, not literally, but figuratively, they kind of saw that. But they also cynically used the relationship which America and Americans typically enjoyed as part of our own political culture. Don't we like to be the big policeman on the block? Don't Americans enjoy going into countries like Afghanistan or Vietnam and teach them about democratization, right? Even if we have to kill every single gook in Vietnam, we're going to make sure that they adopt democracy. And the Japanese term for democracy is demokrashi. There is no concept in native Japanese language. It's an adaptation of the U.S.-led enforced post-war constitution, which were written, from what I understand, by American policymakers who were most left liberal type people who wrote the Japanese post-war constitution. And one of the key elements of the post-war constitution in Japan was Article 9, which says, I'm paraphrasing, that Japan would renounce forever war, any type of not any type, but but any type of offensive action, right? And they've only kind of been slowly tiptoeing around going overseas under the guise of the United Nations or maybe a small, limited military action to kind of get their their own public kind of use because Japan is still very much especially the teachers unions and are left liberal. Most of them are still I would refer to on the pacifist end of the on the spectrum. So the Japanese government is not going to get a lot of political the LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party, is not going to get a lot of support if they promote overtly militarism. So they have to kind of go very slowly here. And at the same time, the U.S. and its military contractors want to push Japan to buy more and more hardware, military aircraft and technology and whatnot. But since the American and British bankers primarily have been also building up China at the expense of Japan's military security, as I alluded to just a moment ago, people like Abe and his group, it's called Nihon Kaigi, um, Japan Committee. I guess it's kind of sounds innocuous, but it's more substantial than that. I don't have time to get into it. There's a whole literature on that, and not all you read about in the journals of opinion and general interest magazines. Japan's gone right wing. They're going back to militarism. There's a huge propaganda effort to saying we're going to go back to the rape of Nanjing and just like those World War II propaganda movies that were coming out on high. That's where Japan's going to go. We know they're crazy fanatics. The air of civility is just superficial. They're going to go ape on us, right? That's what we're being told right now. But Abe, that faction there, has been rethinking the fundamental relationship between the United States and said, no, we're going to chart an independent course. We're going to become a quote unquote normal nation. I don't know what the term is in Japanese, but it sounds pretty innocuous, normal. But we're going to go our own way that maintains a very strong strategic, economic, military relationship with the United States, but we're still going to be dictating. We are a sovereign nation after all. We're not going to be run by Washington D.C. or by Wall Street or the City of London. And by the way, these were the disagreements that also got Japan into the well, they call it Taiheiyo Senso, the Pacific War. We call it World War II, the Pacific War. That's the same type of tensions, right? Banking tensions that were. And Dionyso talks about the Order of Death as being primarily a banking entity, right? The Brotherhood of Death. That's the same type of tensions that were leading up to what we know as World War II. And seeing now, of course, the technology. And of course, speaking of technology, there was also talk under the Abe group, Nihon Kaigi, and the new prime minister, by the way, is also aligned with the Nihon Kaigi. These are neo-nationalists. They're called, in America, they're referred to as ultra-nationalists because they want to stigmatize. Just like Trump, the analogy is not perfect, but just like Trump is stigmatized as being an ultra-nationalist or right-wing fanatic and is going to plunge us into to devastating wars and plunge us into economy and conflict and all that, right? It's a very, very similar type of strategy the American news media in particular are applying to Abe and his group. So they're even talking about, in Japan, they have talked about revising the Japanese constitution to saying, well, Article 9 is really not relevant in today's 21st century world where we have China there who's armed to their teeth with both conventional weapons as well as nuclear. So we're going to rethink our nuclear strategy, our nuclear policy. By the way, from what I've read, I have no direct knowledge, but from what I've read, Japan already does. They do have nuclear arms. They do have nuclear weapons. They're not announcing it. They're not doing any sort of saber rattling. And that was partly exposed during the Fukushima incident where there were all these, hey, where did all these weapons come from that they had to move out of there or relocate them? So there was some discussion that possibly Japan had gone energy, from energy standpoint they had, but from a weapons standpoint, they possibly had gone nuclear already. All right, let me see if I can get you this graphic here, some graphics. I'll remove this from the studio, remove this from the studio, and we'll bring in, let's see here. Bear with me a moment. I have to reload this. Okay, here's your Dave Dionisi.
Members of a secret group, known as the Brotherhood of Death, created a plan to start three world wars. The first in 1914, a second in 1939, and a third to happen many years later. If you open your mind even 1% to the possibility that a powerful one world government organization exists, this documentary can change your understanding of the world that you live in. The Brotherhood of Death is an organization operating secretly to rule the world. The book Defeating the Brotherhood of Death explains their plan for three world wars, which has been confirmed by former Freemasons and other credible people, including Cardinal Rodriguez of Chile. This true story of what happened on August 6th and August 9th, 1945, begins with a top secret meeting on September 13th, 1942, which took place roughly 75 miles north of San Francisco. The meeting place, known as the Bohemian Grove, is a woodland hideaway owned by the Brotherhood of Death Front called the Bohemian Club. The Bohemian Club serves to provide an exclusive location where multiple Brotherhood of Death secret societies can meet and participate in bizarre occult ceremonies. A key ritual sacrifice, known to participants as the cremation of care, occurs annually in July. The Bohemian Grove has been the epicenter for many meetings held by high-ranking Brotherhood of Death agents. Foremost among the attendees of the September 1942 meeting were the members of the S1 Executive Committee, led by an agent of the Brotherhood named Vannevar Bush. These men were the scientific leadership for the Manhattan Project, who would go on to develop the two atomic bombs used on Japan. Although it would seem that the S1 committee were the ones responsible for the bombs, there was a much more powerful but unseen group that controlled them. One of the top men in this group was Bernard Baruch. Since the early 1930s, members of the Brotherhood of Death had been meeting at the Bohemian Grove to make their plans to start a second world war. In control of these men was Baruch, who at the time was a top-level Brotherhood agent in the United States. Among his early assignments, Baruch had helped maneuver the U.S. into joining the First World War and was put in charge of the War Industries Board in 1918. In 1919, Baruch served as a key participant at the Paris Peace Conference and advocated for the creation of the League of Nations. Baruch was responsible for helping many people reach top military and civilian government positions. President Eisenhower said, "As a young and unknown major, I took the wisest step in my life. I consulted Mr. Baruch." By the early 1940s, with the Second World War now underway, Baruch and other secret society members, loyal to the Brotherhood but performing their daily roles as important political figures, had started to fine-tune their plan for the use of the atomic bomb. Bernard Baruch played a behind-the-scenes role in ensuring agents serving the Brotherhood were in key atomic bomb targeting-related positions. Five-star General Hap Arnold, a Freemason serving the Brotherhood of Death, specifically instructed other generals to keep both Hiroshima and Nagasaki free from conventional bombing attacks prior to August 1945 in order for scientific experiments to be conducted. The Brotherhood of Death, being intimately involved in every aspect of the atomic bomb program, wanted more than just the defeat of Japan.
Okay, so that is from the perspective of Dave Dionisi. Now, I should say that there are competing groups, organizations that are fighting for the soul and the economy of Japan, not just the Brotherhood of Death. The other one is the Vatican, because Dionysi himself is aligned, I believe, with the Vatican. He doesn't talk about that. He talks about how martyrs, which is true, who are of the Roman Catholic faith, were murdered by untold numbers. I don't know the exact figures in Nagasaki. That was the second city that was bombed by this strategic bombing attack. And according to Dionysi, this was the Freemasonic revenge or attack on the Vatican. But the Vatican itself has been involved, as I mentioned before, in trying to extend its own its own more than a foothold, its own control of these economies, including its own asset, possibly, this is speculative, Zavia Bercerra. So, as I conclude here, how does this fit in with the Moon organization? How does it tie in with the Central Intelligence Agency? Well, as I alluded to earlier, and I realize this talk is a little bit disjointed, as I alluded to earlier, there was a Class A war criminal named Sasakawa who was buddies with Abe, the assassinated prime minister. His grandfather, they were buddies. They were chums. I think they were fellow prisoners as well at Sugamo, right? Uh, he created a synthetic religion. Sound familiar? He created a synthetic religion and called it the Unification Church. And he funded it with all these drug proceeds, human trafficking, gambling, right? Yeah, the Yakuza street money would filter upwards to Sasakawa. He was the person who was accumulating all this, and of course kicking back a lot of the money into the elective officials in America, including people like Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon's presidency was made possible by a lot of this LDP dark money that was coming through Japan, Sasakawa. And this is not me. This is according to biographies that I have read about Nixon. And we can assume that it was not just Nixon. It was probably every single president since the end of World War II who has been getting these kickbacks here. So Sasakawa formed this synthetic religion, and it's called Unification. And he found this guy, this evangelical Christian named Sun Myung Moon, who, the legend goes, escaped from communist North Korea, carried his mother miles and miles to what is now South Korea, and started preaching to all the poor displaced people of the Korean War. This is one of America's unknown, underappreciated wars that we were responsible for, the Korean War. So he came out of that, Sun Myung Moon. And then he was brought to the United States using our very generous tax exemptions and our legal structure. And of course, they hired the top Washington, D.C. attorneys to set up the different foundations, which were used as intelligence pass-throughs under the guise of a church that could compromise the whole D.C. establishment, the Washington, D.C. establishment. So this is the most immediate predecessor to what is going on now with President Joe Biden, him being and his son, right, being compromised by China, Russia, Ukraine, and other governments. This is part of business as usual for DC. I'm not saying that that's the way it should be, quite the opposite. I'm saying that Biden is following this pattern, which we might be able to put a little bit of a break on. I don't know if it's going to go away, certainly not overnight. But because of his moral crimes that are so outrageous and egregious, that we might be able to get a little breathing room as they let us up while they repair the damage to the reputation. One of the strategies of these South Korean, it's KCIA, the Korean CIA was founded, started, administered, and trained by the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States, right? Repressive. They supported all the repressive military dictatorships in South Korea. Only recently has Korea become cool again with all the K-pop and the music and all the great movies especially the young people are interested in. But before that, it was very much of a militarist, military dictatorship, quasi-military dictatorship in South Korea, all in cooperation with the United States and the complete support. So the Moonies came in with Sasakawa, and they were able to filter in tons of resources as well as compromise all these politicians. And yes, I won't go into detail, but they used children, they used orphans, they used female Korean orphans to visit key senators, House of Representatives, and different lobbying opportunities. And this was going on in the 1950s. And by the way, I have some clips. I don't have them queued up here, but I have some clips from old newsreels that will show these little events. And they're usually presented as cultural exchange. Well, this is the little Korean girls showing us traditional Korean dance, right? Or samunori drumming or music, folk expressions, right? They did a little bit of that with Japan as well. They sent one of their assets to start a chain of supposedly Japanese restaurants. That's Rocky Oki, right? I've gone through it already. Over and over again, we see the same pattern being repeated. So I checked into this recently to kind of catch up because this documentary that I won't be able to show you came out back in 1995. I wanted, because I haven't heard much about them lately. Since the Unification Church, is it still around? I know Reverend Moon died about it, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe more, but he was ripe old age, 94, 95 years old. So I thought maybe the organization's gone, but no, it's still very much here. It's on they have the headquarters in the state of New York on the Hudson, probably really beautiful view there. So they're still very much in operation, and we can assume that they are still involved with U.S./South Korean and Japanese skullduggery, intelligence, and the shadow government, right? The one that is transgenerational. Doesn't matter what government we're talking about, whether it's supposedly it's democracy, or whether it's a republic, or it's a constitutional. It doesn't really matter. You have these family lines that are multi-generationally working in concert with each other, regardless of nationality or race or whatever divisions that they like to create in society, they meaning the leadership. So that's the unification. That's the Moonies, as they used to be called. I have 2 more minutes, so I'll speak to this very quickly. Another area that I would like to encourage more research into, I haven't seen anything published on it, but this is something that's coalescing in my mind more and more as I watch and look and research audio material, videos. YouTube's been very helpful, ironically. But that is the use of martial arts, not the ones that you see at your mini mall or the little karate or Muay Thai dojo at the local shopping center. I'm not putting that down. I'm glad the kids are getting exercise and all that. But I'm talking about the real dojo straight up, who are run by straight up traditionalists. Japan, right? Nihon Kaigi type people, right? They call them ultra nationalists. I'm not going to use that term because those people who use that particular nomenclature have their own agenda. They want to see a weak Japan so that Wall Street and everybody else can go there and pick their bones, just like they've made us here in America weak to pick our bones, right? Make us wear rainbow wigs and don dresses and say that there's no male, there's no female. Well, it's not quite working out with Japan. That's another reason why Abe probably had to go, because there's a bedrock traditional Japanese culture that has been promoted continuously since 1957, I think, through an organization called Dai Nippon Butoku Kai, which means Greater Japan Martial Arts Organization. Dai Nippon is what Japan referred to itself during the imperial rule. And when SCAP, the Supreme Command, when MacArthur's civilian/military government took over right after World War II, they banned Dai Nippon Butoku Kai. They took away the Hinomaru the Japanese flag with a razor, you can only use the circle. We want all traces of Japanese imperial militarism effaced. We want it eliminated. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Just like in Germany, which we see today, just like in Italy, which we see today, just like in Russia, right? Ukraine, you have what you'd call fascist organizations alive and well that work in concert with the officially, ceremonially constructed governments. It's true in the US, it's true everywhere else you want to look at. It's also true in Japan, right? But the propagandists on the US side who they're talking about, because they really don't care, they just want to sell armaments and they want to weak Japan so they can control the economy. Because guess who's the ambassador right now in Japan? It's none other than Rahm Emanuel. He's a banker dude, right? They love him there because he likes to take the trains, the Shinkansen, with his wife, who's a dead ringer for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That's Rahm Emanuel, the Chicago mafia dude, right? Made tens of millions of dollars once he left the mayor's office of Chicago and detached himself under Barama. And then Biden made him the ambassador of Japan right now. And I didn't show you the graphic, but I put them all together. And Emmanuel has very close connections to the Vatican. That's why I bring in the Vatican assassination. Yeah, he's a Jew, but that doesn't mean, criminality is multicultural, multi-religious. It doesn't really, it's not, that's what's so beautiful about it. You can have different people from different religious traditions partake because they all want the same thing, wealth and power. So that's your friend. I'm glad I was reminded of Rahm Emanuel. His middle name, by the way, is Israel. Just we don't. So we're reminded, where his real loyalties are. It's not with the United States. It's not his loyalties are not even with Israel. His loyalties is with the Brotherhood of Death, right? So there is hope. I think the hope, and this might brand me as an ultranationalist, a traditionalist. I'm a third generation American. I have no dog in this fight. I'm just looking at this as a cultural forensics expert, an analyst. But I think the hope, the renewal, the regeneration of Japan, because the U.S. is in the process of screwing over and betraying Japan in exchange for China and the so-called Silk Road. I think Japan's best hope is to go back 300 years before Admiral Perry, Commodore Perry, the Freemason, showed up in Noraga Bay in 1853. And in 1852, he was in Okinawa, where I was, right? Not back then, but more recently, right? But go back to the Dai Nippon Butokukai, keep meeting with the Nihon Kaigi, all those groups, all these think tanks, and chart a independent course, not a separate course, an independent course for Japan. It still has the fourth largest military, depending on how you reckon, how you count it up. Has about the fourth largest military. It's probably larger than that if you count the secret nuclear weapons. But as the fourth largest, it's formidable. And I say this because remember I talked about the Article 9, the peace constitution. That's never been in operation. Very briefly it was, but it was soon abrogated. So maybe they should make it official. Yeah, we're abandoning Article 9. I'm not saying one way or another. But that's their prerogative as a sovereign nation, right? So there's hopes all around. I think it's really not a matter of ultranationalism or nationalism, as people like Donald Trump have been saddled with it. I think it's really a matter of sovereignty, and that'll be my concluding thought today. Japan is really opposed to the New World Order. Therefore, Japan, and that's why they're being tagged with, especially Abe group, with this resurgent, ultra nationalistic, crazy militarist, kamikaze, World War II, John Ford type propaganda movies. It's because they are for Japan. Therefore, their people, they want their society, the structure they want. They're not big on immigration. Like 98% of Japanese people are the same ethnicity, and that's their prerogative. right? The way the United States wants to run it, that's our call, right? And same way with other countries as well. But as you know, we're fighting the war against NATO, the United Nations, and the globalist bankers that want all these different countries broken down and rebuilt according to their specifications. So I wish the nation of Japan all the best. I have hopes that you will not just survive, but prevail into the future. That is my ancestral homeland. I have a very strong, more than affection toward. I'm a student of what Japan and Okinawa, what it represents and what has represented, and I expect Japan and Okinawa and people of the Japanese Okinawan diaspora all over the world, including Brazil. There's about 1 million of us there, about 700,000 in the U.S. here, and some in Canada. I see us prevailing against these globalists and all their different hidden hands and their nefarious strategies to subjugate humanity. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I'll conclude there. Thank you very much for your patience, and I apologize for some of the technical glitches. At some point, I'll try to figure out how to do a seamless movie that's not going to tax the memory of the StreamYard or YouTube, whatever it is. Thank you very much. My time's up. We'll see you later. We'll see you on Thursday. Bye.